If you're here for the Sketchfab, how to build your brand's 3D strategy on the web, you're in the right place. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please note that we will be answering questions at the end. We've reserved some time for Q&A, but you can post comments and questions throughout the presentation today, so don't hesitate and we will get to those at the end. I'm Jameson Tilsner. I run business development for Sketchfab, and I'm joined by Paul Chambers. Hi, Paul.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks for being patient while we got our audio figured out.
Please note that the webinar is being recorded today, so we will follow up with all of you attendees by email with copies of the slides and also links to all of the live examples we have shared today. And please don't hesitate to engage with us by email after if you'd like to brainstorm or if questions come up later that weren't addressed on today's webinar.
So we wanted to just take a moment here to talk a little bit about how 3D has evolved on the web, just to sort of set a kind of ground level. Hopefully, because you've joined today's webcast, you've got some familiarity at least with Sketchfab and what Sketchfab's capable of, but it is worth taking a moment to just sort of level set. So when we think about 3D on the web, for many of you, you'll realize that this has existed for some time. Obviously, there's been the opportunity to pre-render 3D images, and that might be shown in a video file or something similar. There's also been, in cases like e-commerce examples, for example, times when 3D has been used in a sort of a 360 environment. So that might be about spinning an object around and looking at it from a number of angles. But typically, this has been a series of pre-rendered images that have been set up from different angles, allowing you to see that from those directions. What WebGL and Sketchfab are bringing to the table is the opportunity to truly see something in real 3 dimensions, in real time, in an interactive manner. So perfect example would be here, as we show on the left-hand side. You know, if we were talking about something like an interior design firm or kitchen design firm, an industry that would most certainly benefit from sharing 3D examples, it may be that prior that you would share these through pre-rendered images. Now we have the opportunity to share that via Sketchfab. Now, for the sake of today's presentation, we've included a number of embedded videos. Obviously, we encourage you to visit sketchfab.com to see these examples running in real time. It may be, depending on your bandwidth, that some of these videos don't play as smoothly perhaps as we would like, but we'll be following up with you in the email following the presentation with plenty of links for you to go and check out. But hopefully you'll see here on the right-hand side that here we have a similar kitchen setup, rendered beautifully with you know, sort of photographic quality and an ability to move around in that space and interact. So we also want to take a moment, again, just to kind of kick off the call today, to talk a little bit about Sketchfab. We are the largest platform to publish and find 3D models online. We're also proud to say that we are the first to do so. We've been in business for around 7 years. Our technology, and really this is something I want to reiterate a number of times throughout this presentation, is a plug-in free WebGL JavaScript-based technology that works in any browser on any device. So this isn't something about needing to load a Chrome extension or downloading any kind of plugin. And of course, that doesn't just mean for you yourself to view 3D content, but it removes that barrier to your customers who can instantly see 3D content on your website, on your social media, without needing to install any kind of plugin. We work across laptop and desktop, of course, but also tablet and mobile, and are set up to be responsive to those needs, working against all contemporary browsers. And then on the top right-hand side, very importantly, we are very plugged into the existing asset pipeline. So, of course, typically 3D models are created with industry standard software, and we accept all of the major file formats, and in fact have worked very closely with most of the software manufacturers, and in many cases have one-click export direct to Sketchfab from said software. Again, lower left, as has been mentioned, we're embeddable anywhere. Think of us very much like embedding a video or embedding an image. If you can place an embed somewhere on the web, you can place a Sketchfab embed. So that's your website, your blog, your content online, e-commerce applications, WordPress applications, and so forth, social media, and so on. And then we have recently introduced a technology that allows us also to accept unlimited 3D file sizes. So pretty much any content that you have, you can throw at Sketchfab. And then finally, again, we will have an example or two to share, but it's worth remembering that any 3D model that is viewable in the browser via Sketchfab is also in turn has the potential to be seen in VR or AR. So if you have a user base who you know have access to VR equipment, and that could be as simple as having a branded Google Cardboard, they can launch any one of our embeds into that environment. And anybody viewing on a contemporary mobile device can also use augmented reality to then project that 3D model into real world space. Finally, just a couple more notes about us. At this point, we're pleased to say that we have over 2 million community members who in turn have contributed over 3 million pieces of 3D content. 200 million people have experienced 3D content from Sketchfab, either through our site or through our embeds, where many of you will be viewing that content. And we've had on the site alone over 1 billion page views over recent years. So really, have really established ourselves in this space. And finally, one last note before we move on to plenty more front-facing examples. This is actually a piece of Sketchfab that many people aren't aware of or don't get to see, and that is our 3D editor. So obviously, typically models and content are generated in off-the-shelf software or brought in from photogrammetry and some other examples that we'll explore. But once you have your content loaded into Sketchfab, we have a whole behind-the-scenes backend that allows you to set up things like annotations, camera angles, the materials, the lighting, and so on and so forth. So it's really not just a matter of sort of uploading your content and kind of praying that it's going to appear nicely. There's every opportunity to then go into this web-based interface and really set yourself up for success.
So who uses Sketchfab? It really runs the gamut from 3D artists to the world's largest and most iconic brands. So this is just a snapshot of some of the brands that we've worked with. And I think what you'll find that's interesting is each brand has found very unique ways to deploy the technology, oftentimes with the viewer or the API in a really unique way. So why should you build a 3D strategy for the web? Quickly. Well, 3D is the future, but it's also the present. It's the backbone of AR and VR, which we hear a lot about lately. The filters that you've probably used on Instagram or Snapchat are reliant on 3D. Virtual reality requires true 3D assets and an ecosystem of 3D creators. AR is not possible without the 3D assets that make up the augmented scenes. And if you've experimented at all with a VR headset, you've probably engaged with 3D. So thinking about 3D as it relates to these emerging technologies is, of course, really important. There's also a more fundamental and immediate use of 3D on the web. For instance, 3D is great to visualize products, show great detail, to drive engagement by creating interactive 3D ads and experiences, to allow users to configure products in real time and view from all angles, and to explore physical spaces on the web in great detail. So here's just a few quick examples. On the left, you can see Made.com has implemented 3D to allow users to experiment with some of their products. The next is a Peugeot ad that was distributed programmatically that allows users to select the color in real time and engage with the vehicle. And then the final example there is a museum drawing room, which allows users to explore the physical details in great detail. And in this case, there are annotations and audio that describe the scene. And having been in this museum in person, it's stunning the level of detail that comes across on the web with this technology. And the results speak for themselves. This is just a few examples of results that we've seen from using 3D on the web. We've seen 25% greater likelihood to buy on e-commerce, 50% growth in sales from people who've engaged with a product configurator, significantly reduced bounce rates on ads, and higher click-through rates on both ads and product pages relative to units in both places. Okay, so now you know why you should build a 3D strategy for the web. Here's how to think about building that 3D strategy. So first, as with any marketing strategy or digital strategy, you want to think about your goals. Here are just a few that we've seen successfully employed. Are you looking to engage users on your website? Are you looking to drive conversion on e-commerce? Maybe you're looking to build more engaging banner ads or a more engaging experience on your website. Customization of complex products, that would be a product configurator, or interactive storytelling. Or it could be a combination of those goals. So next, how do you think about success relative to those broad objectives? Sketchfab is a native web technology, or 3D generally on the web requires native web technology. So anything you can track generally on the web is something that you can track on a campaign built with 3D. So it could be social media mentions, time spent with an experience. It could be engagement, the number of clicks and touches on desktop and mobile, or it could be conversions, or literally anything else that might be useful to a digital marketer. So here are a couple of examples. Driving awareness. The leftmost example is a Nike ad run programmatically across multiple websites. Then you can see an Adidas ad that is embedded on both Twitter and Facebook. Or if you're driving engagement and conversions, again, this is made.com example. Users who engage with both the AR, well, in made.com's example, the 3D on the web or AR are more likely to convert. Product configuration. So this is an example of configurable Audi vehicle that allows the user to view from all angles and select the color or the interior. And then interactive experiences. So this is an example of a project we worked on with Intel and The Economist, a city of the future. And you can see it allows the user to scroll through an envisioned city of the future and dig into elements that are highlighted with annotations as they move through this totally custom 3D experience. And then finally, storytelling. This example that we're looking at is something that BBC worked on about tunnels that were created by ISIS under a mosque in Iraq. These tunnels have been highly protected by the Iraqi government to prevent looting. And the BBC was given special access and has used 3D and photogrammetry to be able to share this beautiful, the wreckage of this mosque with audiences around the world. So those are just a couple of examples. And now we'll talk a little bit about how you can create 3D content.
So one of the typical conversations that we have with a number of our clients, of course, is around the actual content creation. Unlike video or imagery, obviously we are still talking about technology that is something that had traditionally been handled more by specialists. The good news is that that content is becoming much more democratic, and the opportunity to create that content. So on the left-hand side, of course, we have traditional 3D modeling, building some kind of 3D model from scratch. And as mentioned briefly before, we support all of the major players like Maya and Blender, Cinema 4D, and so forth. So we already sort of hooked into those pipelines for any team member that you have that's developing that, that kind of content. But of course, the other thing that's worth knowing is that, of course, computer-aided design is nothing new, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a moment. But typically, you'll find that there's already 3D content as part of your existing product pipeline, and that's very much something that we can tap into as well. On the right-hand side, this is something that many of the brands that we've been working with have been thinking of, only sort of recently been introduced to, and that's 3D scanning, or the concept of photogrammetry, which is the ability to capture a real-life three-dimensional object, or as we saw in the example of the museum or the BBC ISIS tunnels, a physical space, by documenting that space or object with a series of photographs, and then using software like Agisoft or 3D Flow to reconstruct the 3D object from that information. So again, this has now become an increasingly more common way of creating 3D content, and in many ways creates the most accurate representation, particularly if you're concerned with presenting something that is very much a real-world object. But as mentioned, a lot of brands already have content, and this is something that a conversation that we very much encourage as we're starting these discussions, which is to reach back into the pipeline and look for that content through an existing pipeline. So in this particular example, this is the Zodiac Nautic, our boat manufacturing company, and this was put together by a developer who worked closely with them on putting together using our API and e-commerce and configurable experience. And in this case, they have a number of these speedboats that can be then configured. And the actual three-dimensional content that made this possible was something that was already part of their existing engineering pipeline. So it didn't require reaching out to an external resource to put that together. But of course, that said, one of the things that we're very proud of course, is that we have an extremely rich and talented community. As mentioned, over 2 million contributors, adding over 3 million pieces of content. So we can most certainly connect you with some of the most talented members of that community who work either professionally or semi-professionally on creating 3D content and help you get the kind of resources that you need.
Cool. So you've determined your experience and your success metrics, and you have a plan for model creation. So now it's time to think about the 3D publishing strategy. So again, in this sense, it's useful to work backward from your goals. If your primary consideration is awareness, then you may want to publish on your own website, but also through ads, maybe distributed programmatically, and social media posts. One example that we've discussed is using static images or videos in social media to drive back to a more complex configurator or implementation on the API. If your primary consideration is e-commerce conversions, it's important to consider placement on your website. Like, how will you ensure that users encounter the 3D models? What terms do you want to use to describe 3D on your website? At what point will you load the player? And then if you're building a product configurator or a custom storytelling experience like the BBC example you saw, you want to consider the specific ways in which user actions on your custom web experience will modify the 3D viewing experience. Sketchfab's 3D playout is done through WebGL, which Paul mentioned, which makes it compatible with all devices and browsers. So embedding is simple, and it's just a matter of uploading a model to Sketchfab and then embedding anywhere on the web. And it's notable that this technology can be used in coordination with others, many proprietary tools that can only be used on specific devices and hardware and software. And I just want to mention quickly, we have a very robust and well-documented API, set of APIs. With the API, you can control the Sketchfab viewer with JavaScript. It provides functions for starting or stopping the viewer, moving the camera, taking screenshots, and much more. So please feel free to review that API documentation. And if you have ideas for experiences you'd like to create, and it's not immediately clear how you can do that with the API, please let us know, and we'd love to walk you through that.
Okay, just a moment here, wanted to bring us on to the next slide, ongoing innovation. So wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the examples that we've seen, but explore them in a little more detail. I think when we shared the City of the Future example, which was included some annotation, here's another example that we worked with Porsche and the Economist. And as we bring this up to see some of the annotation, just a little bit of further information on that. So you can go ahead and use the UI here to scroll through that annotation left and right, so to speak, or back and forth through that content. Users can also go ahead and click on that to bring that up. And importantly, that through our API, that content doesn't have to just be textual content as well. So it can be textual, as is the example here with Porsche, but it can also bring up imagery. It can link to movie files. It can take you to other places on the web. It can talk back and forth with the JavaScript. So you've got an opportunity there to leverage annotation. Moving on to our next piece, animation. This is something that you would have briefly seen in the Audi example with the doors opening, which is animation that can be controlled from our API, from external page assets. But it's worth remembering that at Sketchfab, we have full support for traditional computer animation. So that can be, anything from rigged characters and branded characters to vehicles, electronics, and so forth, even physics, as we're seeing here with the animation. And moving forward. Camera limits. This is a great example of a functionality that came as part of our discussion with our branded clients who were looking for opportunities to let their followers see terrific 3D content, but perhaps had some concerns about limiting every aspect of that. So in this particular Adidas example, the shoe was surrounded by a branded sort of three-dimensional sphere that had this branded content on it. And it was important that we did not allow the user to pull back the camera from this content to see it. But another great example of this would be something like, we've shown some car examples. Perhaps you don't want to show the underside of the vehicle because that is not something that you would typically show in marketing, or even that part of the 3D model had not been constructed. So that's a great example of how you could limit the camera so that anybody could explore the camera, explore the vehicle from all angles, but not see it from that particular one. Moving forward, ground shadows, another recent example, recently added in the last couple of months, but again, came through our discussion with a number of branded clients who were looking for help in e-commerce environments. So what we have here, and you're seeing here a little bit of the back end that I highlighted earlier, is the ability to automatically create a kind of a studio scoop environment by adding lighting and then generating shadows. So in the example of this Nike shoe, we can create the impression of it being in a studio environment, which is a great way to establish continuity with images for e-commerce, for example, and to take existing 3D assets like the CAD files we've mentioned, and without needing to do any further work, upload those models to Sketchfab and then use features like the ground shadows to really set them off in their best light and give them some context within an e-commerce page. VR and AR was briefly mentioned. Again, just wanted to kind of get your minds thinking about some of the opportunities here by thinking about what some of our other clients have done. In this case, New Balance, for a period of time, we're giving away a free virtual reality headset with any purchase of New Balance footwear. And it was actually quite a nice headset. It wasn't just simply a branded Google Cardboard. They sort of jumped all in and put together a fully branded headset, and then encourage users with these drop-in cards in the product to then go and visit a Sketchfab short link. Of course, this could also be on their own branded site, to go in and pick up that 3D embed and then place it in their headset through a mobile device and go ahead and launch that branded experience. So that's another opportunity to think about. And then finally, this is a sort of, quite frankly, kind of an arcane example, but I thought it was a good one to share. This is anisotropy, which is a kind of a rendering technology that allows us to render very specific ways in which light reflects on particular surfaces, like the sheen that we commonly used to seeing on hair, or the radial reflections that you would get on a compact disc, or something like a frying pan. Again, very specific use case, but the two things I want to note here is that, one, this came through, again, through conversations with our branded clients about wanting to show their product in the best possible light. And secondly, just really demonstrating that in addition to the API features and annotation and so on and so forth, our team is constantly working to make sure that we have the best, highest quality 3D renderer available. It's very much our aim to make sure that we can render into a browser products as lifelike as possible. So that can be something as specific as a car. We've obviously shown plenty of examples of that, but it could be something very prosaic like tableware or dishware or shelving or something. But again, this sort of technology allows us to show most accurately the materials, because particularly if you're in an e-commerce environment, it's very important to get a strong possible sense of what that object looks like. And it's really helped in our conversion from imagery to 3D as a viable 3D e-commerce solution. Great.
So before we get to Q&A, I know we've had some questions come in that we want to address, but I thought I would just quickly recap. So 3D is really important for AR and VR, and it's important to have a strategy for those, but it's also great for driving engagement on your website, driving conversions within e-commerce, building more engaging banner ads with higher click-through rates, enabling customization of complex products, and also for interactive and very unique storytelling like the BBC example. So with that, we'll move to Q&A.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Great to see the questions starting to come in. Just give me a moment. I'm just going to bring some of those up, and we'll set about answering those. In the meantime, it's worth reminding you that, again, feel free to go ahead and add some more questions in the chat or through asking a question through our streaming. And one can also go ahead and email us following the presentation, and we'll be happy to reach out and contact you there. And you can see here we've brought up, you can see there that we've brought up the enterprise@sketchfab.com email address to contact us. So first question that's come in from Peter, and asking about analytics. What kind of analytics can we provide? We shared some examples earlier, but Jameson, I guess this is a great question for you. What kind of analytics can we provide?
Sure. So we can provide analytics reporting on a regular cadence, and we capture most of the data points that you'd expect from most digital media. So we can look at views, unique viewers, number of engagements. You could look at that across both mobile and desktop, time spent, or engagements with individual elements like annotations. But depending upon what your needs are specifically, let me know, and we can look at how we can provide custom reporting for that.
Another question has come in, which is, where do you see the greatest potential for 3D models in e-commerce? I guess I would jump in by saying, we briefly showed the Mate.com example. It really is about, e-commerce is always about putting somebody in a future mindset. It's about getting somebody closer towards purchasing and owning that product. And we've obviously all had that experience where we're contemplating purchasing something and commonly might go to an e-commerce site like Amazon several times before finally committing to purchase. By bringing 3D into that experience, what we're allowing is an opportunity to get you closer to that sense of ownership. It's one thing to see photographs of something, it's another to really truly start interacting with it. It's quite it's actually a subtle but important difference, just getting the opportunity to move it around. And then of course, with our ability to support AR, there is an opportunity as well, depending on how the API is set up and the particular use case with your brand, to then go ahead and launch that item into AR through a mobile device. So that again, in the case of furniture or something, can really help a particular customer kind of put themselves in that future headspace and see the opportunity for that product. Another question. So another question's come in around loading time. So how long does it take, Jameson, I'll have you answer this one if you don't mind. So how long does it take for Sketchfab embed to come up on, well, let's say made.com, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's hard to reference a very specific loading time. Performance is definitely a very important consideration as you're actually preparing the model itself, and probably the most important element of performance. So we're happy to work with you on a case-by-case basis to build a model that's optimized for the given environment. And you can, I think made.com came up, that's a good example to see the way the player loads in a live environment.
Actually, another question came in that's somewhat similar to that, which is how big is the viewer? I'll go ahead and answer that. So the view is about 500 megabytes, but talking about a typical piece of content, you're looking at about probably a meg to a meg and a half. As James had mentioned, this is really about optimization as well. But a couple of things I would note is that we use a streaming technology to ensure that we have a 3D presence on the page almost immediately. And then we bring the textures, which are typically the larger component, in a little later. So this has allowed, this is a perfect example that has allowed us to deliver ads into a display network. And I should say that we're supported by all the major display networks as well. Another question here. Do you see brands using 3D views only on their e-commerce page, or do you think that they need product images as a backup? That's a great question. I mean, I think we've seen both examples of that. We've seen e-commerce implementations that have only used the 3D embed, and we've seen others that have also had imagery as a backup. Again, if you're wanting to put forward a particular lifestyle, so again, in the case of something like furniture, you might want to place that couch or whatever the piece happens to be in a lifestyle environment, then that can be done in 3D, but obviously when we're working with a brand, they also typically have assets as well. So the short answer is that we've seen both examples here. Here's a question, Jameson, I think maybe you can help us with here. We've been asked, what about the Apple USDZ? That's the Universal Scene Description, which is an Apple proprietary 3D file format.
Right. So actually, we don't natively support USDZ, but we're actively exploring adding that to our conversion pipeline, which I'll note does support GLTF, which is the open source standard. And it's worth noting, I think, in this case that you can work both with USDZ and GLTF for Sketchfab. So if you're building a strategy that relies somewhat on Apple's proprietary viewer, you might want to also ensure that users who encounter your 3D models on a non-Apple device can view them through an open source standard.
So we've had a couple of questions come in about various use cases and some of the things that we've shared. Thank you for that. Thank you for following up. Again, as a follow-up to this presentation, we will be sending out an email recap. We'll include a link to many of the examples that we've had. So we don't, fear not. We'll send out those email links, and you'll have an opportunity to see those as well. Question here, I think, for Jameson that I think would be a good one for you. So question here from Alpa. You mentioned that sample banner ads were distributed programmatically, but as far as I know, we're not able to embed Sketchfab models to GDN banner as Google doesn't approve them. Can you update us about this topic?
Yeah, I think I'm not certain about the specific case that you're describing. Generally, we've had success with GDN. So if you don't mind, let's discuss this offline. We should be able to find a solution that works with the specific ad server that you're using.
Another question that's come in from Michael. What sorts of products or markets most lend themselves for AR for e-commerce? Again, I would argue that it's a question of wanting to see that that object in a real world environment. So furniture really is often the go-to example. Even prior to the implementation of AR, there has been a desire to be able to place objects in the real world environment, and a number of brands have done things like letting you take a photograph of a couch or a table and place it against a backdrop that you have taken. So what we're able to do now with AR really is a sort of a real-time interactive version of that, the ability to place it, scale it in that environment, and walk around it. But we've also worked with a number of automotive brands that have also seen the benefit. Again, it's about that future state, that thought of seeing that car on your driveway is a very powerful message. So the ability to bring the model up in that manner has also been successful. Another question here from Guillaume. How 3D models are created, colors, textures set up, who's in charge of creation of these models? So great question. Again, we certainly appreciate that working with Sketchfab. What we're working to do is to make 3D embeds online as ubiquitous and as easy as placing an image or video online. There was a time, of course, when the notion of anybody creating video without specialist equipment was nigh on impossible. I'm pleased to say now that, as mentioned earlier, the democratization of 3D content creation has now made that easier. And of course, with our 2 million community members, we see every imaginable piece of content coming from different levels. That said, I think with the brands that we're working with, there's been two typical use cases. One has been that, as mentioned, following a little bit of discussion and reaching back into the team, it's actually become apparent that even if there was an initial concern over 3D content, that actually that content had already been produced as part of the existing product development pipeline. So that might be about getting in touch with the R&D team or the product design team, who typically have these files at hand. In other cases, we've connected brands with content creators who, just simply by providing them either with the physical piece of content or with a number of photographs, there's an opportunity then to go ahead and commission a 3D designer to put that together for you.
I can take this one. How much does a 3D ad configurator cost exactly? So for reference, please feel free to go to sketchfab.com/plans to see our pricing model. For a configurator specifically, you'd want to build custom front-end technology, which is, of course, dependent upon the specific needs and the level of effort. So we can help you scope that out. Just let us know how we can be helpful.
Question just come in. Is there any plan for future Instagram integration? We are in talks with Instagram. Sadly, nothing to announce at this time. You know, I will say, obviously, because it has historically been an image-based environment, it's something we're very keen to pursue. Their move to support video came not long after imagery, and we're certainly working with them in the hope that 3D will be supported, but nothing to announce at this point in time. I will say, however, again, reminded that we are integrated in Facebook and Twitter. Another question's come in, this time from David. Are there games being developed with the browser viewer or used for work by music or motion artists? Is the API capable of doing this? That's actually a great question in the sense that one of the features that we didn't highlight, but again, I encourage you to visit sketchfab.com to see examples, is we do support audio, and that can be audio that is either ambient, so it might be a talk track, and the BBC ISIS example is actually a great example of that, where you are walked through this environment by a journalist who is narrating. We also have the support for spatial audio, so as you move closer or further away from a product, we can then simulate the sense of audio in space. And again, as part of the API, there is an opportunity to trigger audio outside. As far as interaction is concerned, again, lots of great examples, hopefully many of which we've shared today, the ability to swap out materials, to swap out three-dimensional geometry, so that can be about opening doors or closing cabinets or changing from a metallic surface to wood and so forth. So these are all possible with the API. Certainly, though, David, I will say that if you're talking about something highly interactive, you know, reach out to us at enterprise@sketchfab.com, and we'll be happy to talk about your specific needs. We're always looking to learn about use cases as to how we can make our API more flexible. Another question regarding Facebook. Does Facebook integration use the Sketchfab render engine? The short answer is yes. We are just think about us as an embed, very much like you would embed a YouTube video, you know, wherever, you know, anywhere on the web, essentially, that you could go ahead and embed a video, you can pretty much go ahead and embed Sketchfab because we bring it in through an iframe style embed. So we are rendering that technology. We have had a question come up again, another question here about security measures. How do we help keep models safe? Jameson, perhaps you'd like to answer that one?
Sure. So this is a pretty complex topic, and we've actually been through significant detail with a lot of our larger customers and partners to work through it. The shorter answer is that we follow standard best practices for data security and have been vetted repeatedly by IT security departments. It's worth noting that models can be made private, so unlisted on Sketchfab and not indexed by any search engines. And the viewer uses heavily compressed version of the model, so original files can't be expressed.
The question came in, this one from Daniel. How important do you think devices like the HTC Vive, Oculus, PlayStation VR, and so forth will be in the future? Well, you know, we've obviously have support for all of the major players and major devices. It really does come down to a brand strategy. You know, if you're in a controlled environment and you know that you're talking with clients or customers who readily have this equipment at hand, then you should most certainly think about supporting it. The most common use case that we've seen has been sort of the branded Google Cardboard, whether it's been some form of conference or exhibition where these have been handed out, or if they've been handed out at retail, like the New Balance example, where you're essentially setting up your end client to have the equipment, in this case, obviously very rudimentary equipment, available to them to view that. You know, obviously the way that VR is being picked up is a much bigger subject, you know, certainly beyond Sketchfab, but we all certainly think that that will be a large component. But AR, or augmented reality, the ability to place an object in space, in part because of its close relationship with mobile devices, has really been the growth area for us. And again, with examples like e-commerce, we see a close opportunity there. Okay, just looking up for some more questions. Just checking ones, making sure anything we haven't answered. Here's a specific question, Jameson. Maybe you want to answer this one. So, does the viewer support automatic levels of detail? In other words, deliver a small model to mobile, but then a high-res model to desktop? That's a great question.
Got it. Yeah. So we do choose the best setting for performance and quality for texture resolution, and we're working on the same for mesh resolution. And we will not show options lower than your device's default. It's also worth noting, we mentioned the product in beta that we're working on that allows massive file sizes, which is really designed to do exactly what you've described there.
The questions come in from Marwan. Again, thank you for your questions, and apologies if we're not getting to everybody's questions. We have a lot of them coming in. This one is it possible to have an automated camera movement as a clickable option? Yes, and in fact, in the Audi example we shared, it did run by very quickly. So again, we encourage you to view the links as we send them out, but that's a perfect example. So as you move from the exterior of the car to the interior, we take you to different camera perspectives. We also have the ability through annotation to set you up that way as well. And in fact, as part of our annotation backend, one of the things that you do is, in addition to specifying where the annotation point is and what kind of content you want to associate it with it, whether that be text, video, imagery, so forth, is actually setting up the camera perspective. So you can very specifically specify where you want the camera to travel to view that particular item. So
a question was asked about whether models on a site like the made.com site, for example, can use the AR experience, or does it require the Sketchfab app? That's a great question. So currently it requires the Sketchfab app, but we're actively exploring WebXR. So hopefully that will be an opportunity in the near future.
And then finally, last couple of questions. A question from Ben. Will the increase of 3D on the web, with the increase of 3D on the web, do you see platforms adding 3D integration natively, or the current method of embeddable content continue to be the norm into the future? Well, I would answer that by saying, we are a technology that's based on WebGL, which is an open documented language, and we by no means claim to be the only WebGL integration, but with 7 years in the business, we do have a very robust technology built upon that foundation. And so often the conversation we have with clients who do bring this up as a topic of discussion is really about a couple of things, which is one, about development and maintenance. I mean, much like plenty of other web technologies, whether that be about Stripe for payment solutions or about an embeddable plugin for e-commerce, is that something that you want to develop in-house, or is that something that you want assistance with? Nothing stopping you from developing this technology in-house if you have a specific use case. But what we can guarantee is uptime, performance, optimization, quality of rendering, and so forth. Just looking now for the last question. Again, apologies, we've got a lot here, so I don't think we probably just got time for one more. No, I think. Oh, yeah, this is a great question. I think we'll make this our last question from David. What was the most surprising or creative way a brand has used Sketchfab? Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, it's really, again, because it's a web-based technology, there are so many different ways to integrate us. You know, we've shown obviously plenty of e-commerce examples and brand and display advertising, but I would say that don't you know, underestimate also sort of the kind of the humble landing page or product page. So we've seen a number of our brand shoe design brands like Adidas and New Balance use us as a way to really help launch a product. So it's not just been about display advertising or about placing the product in an e-commerce pipeline, but really showing off the product to the best of its, you know, in the best possible light. So, sorry, go ahead, Jameson.
And you know, this is not an example of an advertisement, but I think the way that the BBC leveraged the API to build a really unique storytelling experience highlights the power of the technology. And I think also the example of the drawing room in the museum and other cultural heritage examples, Versailles, for example, show the ways that you can capture physical spaces and showcase them on the web in a totally unique way.
So thank you, everybody. That just about brings us up to the hour. I want to thank you all for joining. We appreciate all of your time and patience getting set up and your questions. We apologize if we didn't get a chance to answer everybody's question. But again, a reminder, we will be sending out this recording. We'll be sending out all links that we've covered here, so you'll get a chance to see and explore these in 3D rather than seeing them in streaming video. And any questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, just let us know and we'll be happy to follow up with you. Reach out to us at enterprise@sketchfab.com and we'll be happy to help in any way we can.
Yes, thank you guys so much.